Well, you know what they say about men and their sheds. I've got a Noel Deed here today who's really sort of gone a bit far, Noel. But this hobby of yours, boat building, has really turned into a ministry, and that's really what I want to talk about. Hey, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Kent, for the invitation.
So, for how long have you been into model boats?
Around about age 18, so it's a long time.
Oh, wow.
Goes back to the very first one.
Yeah? Wow, and that's incredible. And I guess, all shapes and sizes of boats? Didn't you start off with a destroyer or something when you were
That's
when you were quite young?
What I call the jam tin special, about a metre long.
Yeah.
I cut these tins out, soldered them together, put a steam engine in it, out onto the river, turned the rudder, and it came back.
Big circle. So
Right.
you're always pretty ambitious when it came to model boats by the sound of it?
Absolutely.
Wow, that's incredible. And here we have, and also a cross-section here, we have Noah's Ark. Goodness, how long, let's just look at this model for starters. How long did it take you to make this? And where did you get the gopher wood, is what I want to know.
That model took almost 2 years
Wow.
to build. But before that, research as to the shape, timber and so forth.
Yes.
A lot of work, but I was so interested that I just worked and worked.
And the fascinating thing for me is that inside you've gone to a lot of effort here for the detail inside, with all these decks and compartments, and goodness, there's even tiny little animals in here to scale, or maybe they're just on my side here. I'll turn it around.
Yes, they are to scale pretty well.
So what is the scale?
The scale of the model is 1 to 85.
Okay.
The animal's 1 to 87, so it's a pretty good match.
Pretty good match. Okay. So you read Genesis, and you looked at the dimensions, and you figured out the cubits and all, and voila, is that the process?
Pretty well. Genesis 6 gives the length, the breadth and the height in cubits. And if we put that into metric, 137 metres by 14 metres by 23.
Okay. Wow. So it's pretty hefty. The thing, I mean, you did this, I guess, essentially for fun at the beginning, but this has turned into a ministry. Can you tell us how that's happened?
It has, in fact. Actually, I was challenged by a lady in our church, can you build a scale model? And after some thought and investigation, I thought, yes, I'd love to do that. And I was really seeking to prove to myself by doing a scale one that it would look like a real ship. And that's exactly what I did. When I finished that, I then turned to the cross-section, which is a different scale again, because I thought if people wanted to see it, that tells them what it's like as a boat.
Yeah.
This shows what it's like on the inside.
Gives you an idea of the functionality, because of course a lot of us are used to sort of this sort of image when we think of Noah's Ark, you know, the children's book version with the giraffe with its head sort of poking out the window and that sort of thing. And it's really hard to believe that a boat like that could, deal with floodwaters and could fit all their animals in. But looking at this, suddenly it seems a lot more believable. Is that the reaction you get from people who say this does look like a real ship?
That is the reaction. In fact, the first time I exhibited this at a models exhibition, I was actually quite stunned at the reaction of the people. Because you imagine that boat being amongst 300 other models of scale ships. People coming along and looking at ship after ship, and then they come to this one, and the typical reaction was oh, is that Noah's Ark? Yes, that's Noah's Ark. But that looks like a real ship.
Yeah. Giving away that they actually have never really considered it to be a real ship or a real story.
Why did you think it was otherwise? And, the typical cartoon version.
And then the conversation starts.
And then I'm able to come right through and say, well, you know, the dimensions of this are given in the Bible, or the proportions.
Yes.
Is that right? Genesis 6. And at the end of the conversation, they say, I'm going to go home and read that in my Bible.
Well, I mean, people must have some practical questions. I mean, looking at it now, I think, I mean, I'm a bit of a multi-hull man, you know, catamarans and trimarans, so I look at a mono-hull suspiciously at the best of times, but I look at this and I think, well, it looks like it could flip pretty easy if a wave hit it broadside. Wouldn't it sort of be all over for Noah and his animals?
Well, that's what you may think. But there have been at least 2 naval experts in the last 20 years who have examined those proportions, computer modelling, test tanks with various other shapes, and they have determined that as a drifting ship in the storm conditions that it would have gone through would have been very stable. It would have handled waves up to 30 metres.
Wow.
It would have leaned, but no more than about 30 degrees. And they've given a very impressive endorsement of that proportion.
Okay.
So the length is 6 times the width.
Yeah.
The breadth, or the beam, is 5 to 3. And they have been found to be just ideal for that purpose.
Okay. And what about lengthways? Are the proportions about right? Because I can imagine a big boat like this going with a wave under the bow and the stern, the middle sort of cracking. Is that a possibility with a boat this size? Or?
Well, let's remember that this is a timber boat.
Yes.
If it was a steel boat, it could be a lot longer. Given the kind of waves that storm would have generated, if that was much longer, there would have been too much of the boat unsupported by water, and it could easily have broken its back.
Okay, so it had to be shorter.
That 6 to 1 was ideal for the waves and side waves. If they had made that quite a bit shorter, the opposite result, coming up and down a wave, it could have just buried its nose and flipped.
Pitch pole, yeah.
Pitch pole.
Wow. Okay, so it's like Goldilocks's porridge. It is just right.
It's just right.
Yeah.
It's just right.
Wow. Well, that's incredible, Noel. We're going to take a short break now, but we'll be back in just a minute to ask Noel more about his ark and his ministry.
Planning your future can be a daunting task. What you want to do, who you want to be, and the road ahead can often be unpredictable. No one really knows what the future holds. That's just part of what makes it all so amazing. And that's why a great education matters. Because it doesn't just help you get a great job. It helps you prepare for what life can throw at you and live a great life. Avondale. It's education designed for life.
The media targets our girls with destructive messages. But is there an alternative? Yes, it's Gigi. Gigi is a great new magazine for teenage girls that uplifts good Christian values. Finally, a way to pass on our values in a way the teenage girls in our life will love. So give a subscription to a teenage girl you love today. Visit gigimagazine.com.au. That's gigimagazine.com.au.
Hi, welcome back. Well, I'm here with Noel Deed, model boat builder extraordinaire, and your incredible ark models, Noel. And look, this is a real labour of love. Goodness me. I'm all thumbs, you know, so when I look at this sort of thing, I'm in awe, I have to admit. Now, a lot of people, when they think about this, when they read the story of Noah's Ark, they say there are so many animals in the world, and Noah's Ark is just, you know, a limited size. Realistically, even with all the decks, could you really fit enough animals in to sort of repopulate the earth?
That's a good question, Kent. If we go back to the Bible reference, it talks about male and female of each kind, not each species. And as an illustration, if you take dogs, there would have been a male and female dog.
Okay.
Look how many breeds of dogs you've got today, the species.
Yeah. Well,
and you've got this adaptation and interbreeding. And if you follow that principle, go back to the kinds, there was a man, a geologist, biologist, who did a study of this, John Woodmarope, and he determined that there would have been about 8,000 genera, or 16,000 animals, creatures.
Yep.
Would have been just a few more because the clean ones, there were 7 and not 2.
7 pairs, wasn't it? Or
7 number.
Or 7, okay.
And the birds, there were 7 of those. He also determined that about 11% of the total number of animals would have been no bigger than a sheep.
Okay.
And therefore
Which is
you
true.
could
We
have
even don't have that many large animals today,
a lot of smaller cages. We think of the elephants and the rhinos and the hippos, but there's not a lot of the really big ones.
So they would have needed to have, I mean, a species is pretty much what you need today to interbreed. There aren't many species that will interbreed, but maybe a genus. Yeah, I mean, it's not the way things are now, but they would have had to have been to interbreed and specialise in order to come up with all the species today. Is that what it comes down to?
Well, following the flood, it's thought that there would have been a lot of, almost an explosion of species.
Yeah.
When the animals were to go and multiply and fill the earth, and almost an acceleration of species and breeding and so forth.
The other thing I've also wondered is if they'd had baby animals on the ark rather than full grown, they also would have taken up less room.
Well, it's thought that you wouldn't take the biggest elephant or the old hippo.
Yeah.
It would be virtually the equivalent of a teen, a healthy teen animal, so it would have been smaller and healthy.
Okay.
So that would have saved a bit of space too.
So walk us through some of these decks here, Noel, and what had to fit in there.
Okay, we remember that the instructions to build the ark, there were 3 levels. So you've got your 3 levels. These are like a mezzanine to accommodate the much smaller animals.
Okay.
And it's thought that the heavier, larger ones would have been on the bottom.
Well, that'd make sense, yeah.
And as you go up, the smaller ones, and then the very tiny ones up the top.
Sorry, giraffes, you don't get to stick your heads out the top of the ark. Yeah, okay.
Well, they can put their heads up there.
Wow, okay. And what about lighting and you know, airflow and that sort of thing?
That's an interesting question. We have a window right along the top which would have allowed a certain amount of light in and would allow for air circulation. That centre section is open so that you've got the possibility of ventilation and light coming through. But it's also generally thought that within the ark itself there wouldn't have been a lot of light. In fact, you would tend to get a degree of darkness down here.
Sort of a permanent evening, yeah.
That's right. And animals in a darkened situation tend to sleep.
They do, yes. They
and
hibernate.
If you have a lot of darkness, they hibernate.
Yeah, okay.
And it's thought that that hibernation would have made the journey much more simplified for Noah.
And they would have eaten less, of course.
So they wouldn't have to feed them every day. They may sleep for 2 or 3 weeks and then have another feed. They don't have big pens, so they're not running and using up energy. And then the outflow of that is that if they don't eat very much, they're not going to poo as much.
Sure, yeah.
And that other problem of cleaning the pens, it's not nearly the problem that some people think. And then when they do, the principle of recycling, you've got your dung beetles and your worms and so forth. In a cow paddock, you see that at work. And the same principle, I'm sure, would have been operating.
So a lot of work for 2 dung beetles and 2 worms, though, Noel. They would have had to have smuggled a few extra on, I reckon.
They might have had a lot more.
They would have had to. Wow. Yeah, some of the logistics are interesting. So when you present you know, these details to people when they see the models, what sort of response do you get?
They immediately start to realise that Noah's Ark was feasible.
Mm.
Instead of saying, well, it was a cartoon fairy story, couldn't have happened, they're now saying, oh.
Yeah, not that all their questions are answered necessarily, but...
No.
Yeah.
But it sets them thinking.
Yeah.
And they begin to then accommodate that this was a real situation.
Mm.
And of course that flows on, okay, so the Genesis account, maybe that's true.
Yeah. So the book of and then I guess the Bible overall, it goes to the reliability of the Bible. Because something like Noah's Ark is a sticking point for some people, isn't it?
It is.
You say, well, yeah, the Bible looks historical, but when I look at a story like Noah's Ark, goodness.
Well, the book of Genesis is often relegated to myths and fairy stories. But if the Ark is true, if the flood really happened, then the Genesis book comes back into real history.
Yeah.
And you've got the beginnings of everything in Genesis that flows through to the rest of the Bible. So the question becomes a very vital one.
Wow. And I guess one that you've become a lot more adept at answering since you started this.
Well, I've become fully convinced because of all the research that I've done.
Oh, it's built your faith as well.
It has.
Wow.
Certainly has.
Hey, thanks so much, Noel, for going to all the effort
Did you want to see the light?
Oh, yeah. Switch the light on for us. There you go, lighting. Now, they didn't have LEDs in the real Ark, did they?
Well, we don't know.
Hey, Noel, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time and for going to all the effort of bringing all this stuff in. Thank you for coming in and for your ministry.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
We'll be back in a minute.